Hi, this is Glenn Eaton. I played Johnny U in The Last Dragon, and just telling you all to, if you can join in and listen to me on Second Acts Podcast. Thank you, and have a great day.
Welcome to another edition of Second Acts Podcast. F. Scott Fitzgerald once wrote, "There are no second acts in American lives, but there are on Second Acts Podcast." This is episode 3. I am your host, Sean Riley, and today's guest is Joel M. Reed, the cult director of the notorious Bloodsucking Freaks, right after this. Hi, this is Sean Riley, host of Second Acts Podcast. I'm not just a podcast host, but I'm also the director of the feature film Fighting Belle. Fighting Belle is a romantic comedy best described as Legally Blonde meets Rocky with a dash of Sweet Home Alabama thrown into the mix. When a sassy Southern belle is jilted at the altar by her fighter fiancé, she trains as a boxer to get her revenge. Don't miss what movie reviewer Toxic Fletch describes as a Southern fried romantic comedy with a distinctly different approach to finding love. And the movie critic next door writes, warm Southern charm and ice-cold revenge that somehow works beautifully. Be sure to rent or own Fighting Belle today on Amazon Video. Today's guest is the director of one of the most controversial films of all time, according to filmsite.org. His 1976 film Bloodsucking Freaks was given 0 out of 4 stars by TV Guide, which also called it an exercise in total grossout. Scott Weinberg of eFilmCritic.com wrote, "When people use the term bottom of the barrel, they often forget about the underside of the barrel." Weinberg went on to write, "If you enjoy watching this movie, I honestly don't want to know you." And reviewer Dennis Schwartz wrote, "If you're not revolted by it, you might be a sicko." Are these reviews examples of histrionics and hyperbole? Well, yes and no. For sure, Bloodsucking Freaks is a nasty little piece of cinema. But if it were only that, I don't believe it would still endure over 40 years later. Director Joel M. Reed's tongue is firmly planted in cheek during the gross-out fest that is Freaks. Masterly accompanied by campy, detached performances by its cast, most notably Seamus O'Brien as the master of ceremony, Sardu. And like the most memorable exploitation pictures in time, Bloodsucking Freaks isn't content to simply fit in with the genre, but transcend it instead. Joel M. Reed is an interesting interview subject because he makes no apologies about straddling that fence between the mainstream and the seedy underbelly of life and cinema. He seems to have accepted his place and learned to enjoy the notoriety over time. Joel is filled with some great stories from his experiences, so many in fact that we didn't even get to Bloodsucking Freaks in the interview, which is the primary reason he's sought out by interviewers and fans. Indeed, you'll hear a huge spectrum of names thrown around during the interview. Names like Marlon Brando, Gina Rowlands and John Cassavetes, Angela Lansbury, Oliver Stone, and many others. I enjoy getting to know Joel and learning about the makings of an exploitation filmmaker, as well as life after his nuclear bomb, Bloodsucking Freaks. But if there's one regret from the interview, it's the fact that I didn't get to ask him about casting a young Doris Roberts from Everybody Loves Raymond in his 1976 movie Bloodbath. So Joel, if you're listening, stop by the Second Acts Facebook page when you get a chance and fill us all in.
Hey, we're joined today on the podcast by Joel M. Reed, director of the famous, or shall I say infamous, cult film Bloodsucking Freaks. How you doing, Joel?
I'm doing great. I'm sorry I'm late. Donald Trump is my neighbor, actually, and the streets are all blocked off, and I got hung up in traffic, but I think I dealt with more horrible things in my movie than Trump. So,
and that's just another day in New York, isn't it?
yes, it's another day in New York, and when Trump's in town, I live on 58th Street, a block away from the Trump Tower, and it gets quite congested. But New York has changed a lot since the 60s. It's loaded with tourists. And the New York I knew as a young man has disappeared.
Well, I was going to say, looking at your social media, you seem to be a New York kind of guy through and through. Are you? I take it you're not really a fan of the sanitized New York as opposed to the New York of the 60s and 70s. Is that true?
Well, I'm a fan of the New York of the 60s and 70s. Yes, I'm an ultimate fan of New York of the 50s, 60s, and 70s when I grew up and I was younger, and it was a different place. I knew the East Village when it was really the East Village. I knew Times Square when it was another era. So I think it's all been gentrified. I'm just talking to people I used to walk over, and I met Greta Garbo used to walk down the street and say hello. I met the Gish sisters. And at one time, the theatrical community had a lot of places that they hung out in. I used to go to bars, and the young Anne Bancroft, was Anne Italiano, and you can run into Marlon Brando and Wally Cox and a lot of people like that. I went to school briefly with Gina Rowland, so maybe it's just getting old, or maybe that New York has disappeared, and maybe the younger people have found one similar.
Well, it's pretty amazing, going from Marlon Brando to Gina Rowlands to Donald Trump, I guess, huh? That's quite a change over
Well,
time.
I have a lot of names to drop. I hate to do it, but Tony Bennett lives across the street, and I see Tony Bennett in the park quite often, sunning himself. Merrill Hemingway lived on the block, and I used to eat in this coffee shop on 7th Avenue, and one day the guy says, "Your friend is in the show." I said, "What friend?" He said, "Raquel Welch." And I said, "I don't know Raquel Welch." And he says, "You have breakfast with her almost every morning." I said, "That old lady?"
Well, let me turn that inside out then. How do the Raquel Welches and Angela Lansbury's of the world take to walking the streets and dining next to Mr. Joel M. Reed, director of Bloodsucking Freaks?
I have a lot of followers. I have a lot of goth kids and a lot of adults. I mean, I was sitting in a coffee shop downtown trying to talk to this beautiful young girl who ignored me completely, and the guy ran over from the next table and said, "Joel Reed, you're my best director, my favorite director. I love Bloodsucking Freaks. I watched it 100 times." So I still have a following, I mean, a lot of the new kids that I meet don't even know who Marlon Brando is, So I do have a following, and I have lots of friends on Facebook, and there's a group of aficionados, Usually they have green hair and implants and their piercings on their face and tattoos on their nose, but I love them anyway.
For sure. And I want to get into what seems to be the enduring popularity or notoriety of Bloodsucking Freaks, as the case may be. I want to kind of delve a little bit more into your past. You were born in New York in 1933.
I'll go through my curriculum vitae. I was born during the heart of the Depression. My father and mother were both working and didn't have very much money. I recall I grew up in Brooklyn. I recall at Memorial Day there were still Civil War veterans marching, a few of them.
Mm-hmm.
And there were lots of Spanish-American War veterans and many, many World War I veterans, including my uncle, And then World War II happened. And as a civilian, I lived through the whole thing and seeing all the gold stars in the window in the neighborhood. In fact, the first time I went to Times Square by myself, I must have been 11, and I took the train, which was a nickel then, right to 42nd Street, and I stayed in Times Square about an hour. I didn't get very far from the train station. It was very crowded. So I had, don't think I had any lust for show business or anything. I dropped out of high school and joined the Army at 17. And I went to Korea during the war. And when I came back, I decided to get out of the Army early, and I needed a letter from a school or employee, and the only one I could get was from the Academy of Dramatic Arts, which was on 53rd Street then. And so I signed out of the Army, and I started going to acting school. And I discovered that if you go to acting school and hang around with show business people, there's dozens of pretty young girls, you know. So I think that got me into the business more than anything else. In fact, I went to school with John Cassavetes' wife, Gina Rollins, yes. And he came over to survey the class one day. I think he was worried because I was the only straight guy in the school.
Was Cassavetes' early indie films, was that a major influence?
No. Let me tell you, I got involved in, I was acting, I did some off-Broadway and some television, and I went to work for an agency, then I went to work for MGM, and my exposure was to all the major films of that period. It was at the end of Louis B. Mayer's reign there, and I worked at 1540 Broadway, and I did get to meet a lot of the contemporary stars at the time, like Debbie Reynolds and Elizabeth Taylor. As an artiste, I loved a lot of films. I never considered much, films at all, or movies as we called them. And then at one period I lived in Times Square, and a few blocks down was 42nd Street. And they used to have these all-night movies or 3 movies for $1.25. And sometimes they used to wander over there. And George C. Scott was doing Plaza Street, and my friend, and he used to come over because George drank too much, and he would spend the whole night in a movie. So he, if he had a show the next day. And I got to see a lot of the early Roger Corman pictures, and a lot of these, Jose, whatever his name, these low-budget pictures made in the Philippines. I mean, that was the only outlet. And I sort of fell in love with them because they had their own naturalistic charm, Sometimes they divided, they went beyond credibility, So I saw with Sid Haig, Girls on a Chain Gang, with all the girls in the prison were gorgeous, wearing ballet slippers. And that was my exposure to the small market. And I saw, a lot of those now classics like Count Yorga Vampire, and practically every one. But I wrote a script, and I had a couple of scripts optioned for major production, and I never thought about going into production myself, and it was the time of the exploitation picture. I wrote this magnificent script called The Tiger and the Dragon, which was the first kung fu script ever, and I gave it to everybody, and they said, who would care about these Chinese guys punching each other? One day I met a woman that was in Ilsa She-Wolf of the Gestapo and a lot of those pictures. Her name was Jane Ross. Jane said she was walking along with a paper bag in her hand. She lived on the block, and she said, I said, where are you going, Jane? She said, I'm going to see Arthur P. Jacobs. As you know, he was the producer of Planet of the Apes, the original one, a lot of major pictures. And I said, what have you got in the paper bag? She says, I have a fart. Well, this is God's honest truth. And the people who knew Janie knew that was her humor. And she said, what do you got in that envelope? And I said, I have a script I was supposed to give to somebody here. It's called The Tiger and the Dragon, you know. She said, let me show it to the author for you. Maybe he'll option it. So I gave her the script. And I didn't hear from her for a month or two. And I finally called her and I said, what happened with my script? Did you give it to author? And she said, no, he didn't like the fart. But I did give you a script to one of the greatest filmmakers in the world. And I said, who's that? She said, Joe Sarno. I got a call from Joe Sarno. And he said, you're a magnificent writer. Would you like to write a movie for me? So I said, of course. So I wrote Career Bed. And Joe called me back and said, this is a magnificent movie. You know, you put a little too much in it. He said, let's shoot it. And I said, what do we do next? He said, get $10,000. You know, so being very naive, I had somebody promise me $10,000. At the last minute, my friend Mark Goldberg walked in. He said, I just played cards with you guys, some guys in Long Island. He said, we want to invest in a movie. And I said, I'm ready to shoot one. I have Joe Sarno, the top director. He said, I'll give you the money on Monday. I got the money on Monday. I called Joe. We're ready to shoot. And he says, I'm moving to Sweden. I said, who's going to direct the picture? He said, you direct it. And I said, I don't know anything about directing. And Joe said, do you think I know anything about directing? So that was my introduction. I got 2 books. Hank Miskelly's The ABC of Cinematography and Paul Reitz's The Art of Editing the Documentary Film. And I read them, and I thought I knew how to make a movie. You know, and I got a film student named Ron Dorfman to shoot it, and we made the movie. We shot too much film, but it turned out pretty well. It's actually, I watched it once in a while, and it's really a great movie, you know. Most of my pictures, except Career Bed, under the auspices of SAG. Even Bloodsucking Freaks was a union picture, so there was no problem. You know, their pay was guaranteed. In fact, when I did Bloodsucking Freaks, they had a low-budget plan. I think Don Secchi was the president of the union, and you would submit your script, you know, and they would approve it for the low-budget plan, which, you know, $100 a day or $75 a day. And I sent the script over to SAG on 46 feet, wherever they were at the time, and he called me back, and he said, nobody here has read your script. I said, that's terrible. He says, oh, we don't read student productions. And I said, it's not. She said, we have declared it a student production, and you can use our patronage, you know, and say it's a union film and it's approved by SAG, you know. But don't you dare tell anybody at the SAG read it, you know. So we produced a movie, you know, on the student film rules, but we paid everybody, I think, $100, $150 a day. You know.
So that was kind of the wink-wink, nudge between you and the Actors Guild.
I never had any trouble with any of the unions. I started out worried about them. I found that they were very compatible, you know. And, I mean, if you didn't try to hire from them, you had some trouble with the Teamsters, so you would hire one Teamster for 3 days, you know. But eventually, they started making so many little pictures here in New York, the unions caved in. And then NABIT came in, which was the enemy of IATSE. They merged, you know. And if you were doing a low-budget picture, they work with you, you know. So I never had trouble with any of the unions. I always loved the unions, especially SAG, with working with actors. Because, you know, if you did something like non-union, the actor call up, I got a commercial, I'm not coming in, you know. But if you did a union picture, they had a cut. And you got better people, you know, everybody wanted to be in the SAG.
Hello, fellow skin suits. This is Angel.
And Ember.
Deep down, do you have a secret passion for true crime, sarcasm, inappropriate jokes, but you still want to hear all those lovely details?
However, you still need a little bit of humor to get you through those dark moments?
Then come hang out with us over at the Color Me Dead podcast.
We try to balance both humor and facts perfectly.
We also go on some pretty extraordinary squirrel hunts.
We can be found on iTunes and all other podcast apps.
Come over to Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram and see us at Color Me Dead Podcast for the latest updates and gory chat. We release on Wednesdays because on Wednesdays we wear murder.
Don't forget to spay and neuter your pets
and stay out of chalk lines.
Ryan and Martin were just two everyday guys until they decided to start a podcast. This is the story of the Blood and Black Rum podcast, a weekly movie series where two guys get together to discuss the film itself, ranging from action to horror to giallo, sometimes even Jeff Goldblum, and also the beer and alcohol we're drinking that week. Find Blood and Black Rum podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or any other podcast app, and follow us on Twitter at Blood and Black Rum.
Uh, 1971 saw you move to what maybe I would call the espionage genre, and kind of looking back now that
you mean in Singapore?
Yes.
With then the espionage picture, where
yes.
they released it as GI Executioner or something.
Right, so originally called Wits In, now known in some circles as GI Executioner. Actually,
yes,
that available on Amazon.
I was hired to do that by a strange set of circumstances. I should have never taken the job because I would have had to play on Broadway, but it was an education. I got to go to Singapore and shoot a movie.
Well, how would you compare the experience of shooting in Germany on Night of the Zombies to a GI Executioner in Singapore? Were there any issues as far as the violence and nudity and things like that, or were they pretty welcoming?
Singapore was under the auspices of Lee Kuan Yew, and we met with the government read the script. They actually didn't give a shit, as long as you didn't have it in the street. And we had trouble setting up, and then the guy at Cafe Chris, which was a big Shaw Brothers studio, was there, and it looked like we couldn't shoot. It was too expensive, and somebody came from their other office and said this guy was trying to rip you off, and we got a very good price, and we shot it mostly in a big studio. The Shaw Brothers made a lot of Chinese language pictures. Mm-hmm. So the production in Singapore, except the exotic location at the time, was much easier because we were in one place in the studio. We had an office. I lived right across the street from the studio, and all the jungle scenes in the movie are shot. One is shot next to the local McDonald's. We were going to go all the way up country in Malaya, and then I said, "Why don't we shoot there?" They said it's between the McDonald's and the garage. I said, "Well, it's jungle, and and Germany was easy because we had a production manager said we had to get all these permits, and he's going skiing for the weekend, and we'd go to jail, if we shot anything. And there was a big snowstorm. We woke up, and the German Panzers came by and cleaned the streets in about 15 minutes. So I said, I had all my actors there, and I had the cameraman, and I said, well, Ron winked at me and said, let's go down and do a camera test, We said, okay, Jamie, let's go down and do a camera test, And we started shooting all over the city. And the police actually came and helped us, So we shot the movie without we went into a church. So there were no problems, Only once we were shooting on the street, and this kid about 6 years old and said in German, you're a bunch of wise guys. You don't have the permit. We should turn you into the police. So,
let's talk about some of your cast. Tom Keena, Peter Gnert, Alfonso de Noble, and a couple of very lovely actresses who don't seem to be working pretty steadily today, Janet Wood and Victoria Racimo.
Is she working? Janet, Tom Kena died 2 years ago, and he lost
okay.
He got his leg swelled up, and he said, I'll go to the hospital on Monday. He had thrombosis, they had to cut his leg. He had gangrene. They took his leg off at the hip, and he moved to California. And I think he just, two or 3 years ago, he died. I tried to contact Mykee Morettini. I couldn't find that she's still working. On IMDb, she hasn't done anything in a while. She lived right around the corner here on Central Park West. And when I hired her, she was in the Magic Garden of Stanley's Sweetheart. She did a major MGM picture that was, I think it was a hippie picture that was supposed to go through the roof, and her agent wanted $100,000 for her, and I said no, and get a Chinese girl, and at the last minute she called up and didn't know, apologize and would do it for whatever we were paying, and I should have gotten a Chinese girl, and it turned out her picture was a big flop, so she never became the star. But she was in, for a while, at Dirty Dingus Mykee with Frank Sinatra, and I think he didn't like her and had her fired. But I haven't heard about anything. And who was the other girl you mentioned? Oh, Janet Wood was in the 6 Feet Under.
But I get the sense that GI Executioner is not one of your favorite films of your filmography.
Well, I don't. It's a kind of stupid film. Actually, David X. Young was hired to direct it, and these two guys wrote a script, and I read the script, and it cost about $20 million to do with explosions and elephants and everything. And the producer, Marvin Farkas, hired David to do it, sent him to Singapore, and David was a hippie, and he wouldn't come back, and he kept on asking for more money, and he finally wrote a script. But what he did was copy Casablanca. If you watch the movie about, guy ran a nightclub, and his old girlfriend, and it was Casablanca word for word. And Marvin called me in to meet David, and the conversation went like this. At Bradley Cunningham's, it used to be a jazz place. Everybody place used to be on University Place. And Marvin said, I'll give David $2,500 now if he comes back here and shoots the picture. And David said to something, tell Marvin to stick his head in a urinal, even worse, And then we went back and forth, and David said, I told Marvin 14 times to go fuck himself, and he didn't. So Marvin said, if you don't come with me right now, I'm going to hire Joel to do the picture. Unfortunately, I couldn't do it.
Well, I actually found myself enjoying this film. I think it's a great artifact of the time, and there are a couple of really nice gag scenes in the film with the rickshaw and the soundtrack.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. You probably enjoyed my specific spots of humor. And,
yeah, I did, and especially in the snake under the bed was a really good one as well.
That guy was actually, Singapore had the Chinese gangsters controlling different areas, And my production manager said that, the guy that played her husband, the rough-looking guy, and he walked in and he said to you, why, he's not going to shake your hand out for any money. He wants to meet you. He barely spoke English. But had the tongue protecting us.
1976, and was Bloodbath first or Bloodsucking Freaks first?
I think Bloodbath was first, yes. Bloodbath is a very mild script. I had a much better script. That was freakier, and I did Bloodbath. Some people called me from the Philippines. They had some people here, and they came over and they said, we want to make a movie. And that was Tony Singleton Oh, I can't remember Phil Dearborn. I don't. And Tony Singleton went on to do major movies, and they made a movie about him and his life in Australia called Swimming to Success or something. And so I said, well, I had an idea for an episodic movie. And we were talking, and they said, how much money do you need? And I said, $150,000. So as they were leaving, I said, what do you guys think about the deal? And they said, we wired the money to your bank already. And that's how it came about. We had Alfonso de Noble in there? No, that was in, I try to remember the people.
I think that was Bloodsucking Freaks. He made his second appearance.
That's right. Oh, that was in Blood, yeah. We had P.J. Souls in there.
Yeah, and speaking of de Noble, he's one of the few actors who have made multiple appearances in your films. Do you kind of shy away from using the same actors again, or is it just kind of happenstance that...
No, it was easier if they were hanging around here, drinking, having coffee. I'd hire, I got friendly with Alfonso de Noble and used him in 2 films, So he was a very nice guy. He had a very beautiful young wife. And he was always on a diet. And I said, Jesus, he never eats anything here. I'm very good. The secret of making a good movie is having good food. Nobody cares what that
Right.
And my cameraman or somebody came to me. He says he goes out to his car. It's filled with Kentucky Fried Chicken. And he killed himself. He was out at the, he trotted out in New Jersey. He got stuck in the turnstile. And it took him 3 hours to get him out. He went home and shot himself.
Oh, wow.
So he was a very nice guy,
And interestingly enough, Bloodbath actually received a PG rating, and actually you talked about the episodic nature of the script. It's several tales kind of centered around the theme of greed. Would you call Bloodbath your most, dare I say, even moral movie?
Well, it's moral. I think it's dull, and I shouldn't have done it.
I think I found Bloodbath so interesting because that was the one I watched directly after Bloodsucking Freaks, and I did a little count. I counted 2 stabbings, an explosion, multiple amputations, near starvation, a couple of strangulations, 3 shootings, all adding up to PG ratings. So I thought that was pretty interesting, especially with what was to come after Bloodbath.
Well, in those days when they had, like all my movies are like G-rated now. I mean, Bloodsucking Freaks is nothing compared to what they have on television.
Do you view the industry and filmmaking differently with some life experience?
I view it, I went through the industry from the days when the 5 major studios, owned everything. And there was almost no independent production, And I went through the whole era of, I made the Career Bed was probably one of the first independent films. And sitting right here, was living here. I had Oliver Stone, John Avildsen. I can't remember what's the time. 4 or 5 of the budding filmmakers all came over and wondered how I got about to get money to make a film. Brian De Palma, and we sat around drinking coffee and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw the breakthrough years, and now I see the whole new year. The whole industry has changed. It used to be 2 or 3 years ago you had to get a DVD deal. And now that doesn't work. So I think and there's no more really major distributors. I think if you have a good film, is to exploit it yourself. And the worst get Netflix to buy it.
We had an interesting conversation, and you made a comment, saying, I don't know how you make a film for less than $250,000 today. And I don't know if you're half joking or what you meant by that. But what, is that your take on things, or,
Well, let me tell you, we made Career Bed for $10,000 on film. 35 millimeter film. And that meant buying, short ends. And I think our lab bill was $3,000 or $4,000. And then I made a film after that, Sex Play Advertised, and we actually made $2,500 at the lab cost us. We did it in one weekend. And I had a friend named George Sherman. If you look him up, he did 129 features. He was dead for a long time. He started with Max Sennett. And they used to make pictures in 4 days or 5 days. So there was a way of doing it, and then you went to 6 Super 16. But now it's, with the event of digital, you can make a picture, that's a big cost, versus film, you're saving $50,000 in the beginning.
What would be the magic number that might entice you enough to get behind the camera again and film one of these scripts that you have that you've been developing?
I think it depends on the script. I'm actually going to shoot a couple of things that I can probably shoot for nothing. They're cute, not full-length features. But if you have the most important thing is having the right script, So I figure I have a script you could do for $250,000, and you throw in another movie, and you have to think of the market for that, It has to be exploitable. You have to have an element in it that will draw attention. I watch a lot of movies, and they're pretty dull, and they're on Netflix or on Amazon, and home box office. So you have to.
Yeah.
Somebody told me to make a great movie, get a very beautiful girl, put her in the first scene, have some indication that she'll take her clothes off in the next 90 minutes, and you have a hit. The other thing about a location for making movies, unity of time, place, and action. Are you familiar with that theatrical expression? That's in the theater, in the opera, And everything should have that basic unity. And in the film, if you have the unity of time, it means, people come in with scripts that start in 1904, and jump all over, and that's not unity of time, and it may be a great script, but it's going to be very expensive. So you shoot in real time, or everything takes place in November, and location. It doesn't mean so far one house, but it could be a small town, with 3 or 4, places, and unity of action everything should be related to the story, And that should have a beginning, middle, and end. If you can set up a premise that poses a puzzle, You see what I'm saying? And then you spend the next 60 minutes solving the puzzle, and then you have a resolution.
So tell me about what's going on musically for you now.
Oh, I've been studying music just for something to do, and I'm singing a little bit, and I'm singing a little country western, and I sing with the Veterans Administration group here. Yellow Rain, which I'm working on. I can't see it. Yellow Rain, Yellow Rain, Yellow Rain, Yellow Rain. I'm on the White House lawn. Yellow Rain, where liberty was born. And it goes on, Yellow Rain.
I don't think I could leave an interview with Joel Emery without at least asking one question about Bloodsucking Freaks, which we managed to avoid our whole conversation here, and that's probably what you're accosted about the most. But 4,331 IMDb ratings, 151 user reviews. After 40 years, what is it about Bloodsucking Freaks that each new generation gets a hold of it and it just becomes a phenomenon with that generation? What is it about the film, do you think?
I think it's an enduring comedy. I think it's well put together. I think my humor works. So I'm very glad it's famous, but I'd rather have done, a major movie and made millions of dollars. And I think I did a good job on it. I'm sorry I didn't do that on other things. I took One of the reasons I digressed, I started doing a lot of television commercials and stuff and made a lot of money, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like to make another one that's better than Bloodsucking Freaks. I think the humor still resides in there.
Well, I'd love to see it, and I know everyone else would as well. And I want to thank you for being on our podcast today. Joel M. Reed, director of the notorious Bloodsucking Freaks, which is still going strong after 40 years.
I've been going strong for 40 years.
That'll do it for yet another edition of Second Acts Podcast. I'd like to thank Joel M. Reed for joining us today, as well as you, our listeners. Tune in again next month when we'll have Matt Gilchrist on the show, one of the Robert Palmer Addicted to Love video girls. She'll tell us about shooting the video, as well as many more stories from her life. As always, this is Sean Riley. Music by Mykee Morettini. And don't forget to support our podcast as well. Any donations can be made to integralpix@hotmail.com. That's INTEGRALPIX. You can also rate us or review us on iTunes. And don't forget to visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/secondactspodcast. Leave us your thoughts about this episode, as well as your thoughts about the upcoming episode as well. And don't forget, you can always rent or purchase Fighting Bell on Amazon as well. This has been an Integral Motion Pictures LLC production. Copyright 2017.